if nothing else, this podcast story series is really awesome just because it's making me reflect on the past and think about some of these pivotal moments in my life, purely because there's so much that can be learned and relearned from going through some of these things. And the reason I say that is because I've just realized that the story I'm about to tell is easily the most physically traumatizing experience of my life, yet it pales in comparison to talking about some of these other more vulnerable stories that I've shared so far. So yeah, it's kind of nice having something a little bit more low key to talk about. But to be fair, a lot of what I'm about to recount is secondhand information because I was unconscious at times throughout this story. I'm still in year 11. I've just moved to a new school, finding my feet, going through all this drama with people at other schools, and yeah, not having the best time. This is a two-part story. It's kind of wild how two of the most excruciating things that have ever happened to me were back-to-back weekends at the same place. Maybe that's why I haven't gone back there in a while. Sounds like I'm superstitious. I'm really not. I also had some great memories at this place, out at Good Hope, which is a massive freshwater catchment on the outskirts of Canberra near a little town called Yass. We spent a lot of time out there water skiing and cliff jumping and just mucking around as youngsters. Awesome place. Another one of those gems around Canberra that outsiders have no idea exists because they just go into the city, go to the War Memorial, go to Questacon, Parliament House, bloody Mooseheads, and then they think they've seen all that Canberra's got to offer. And yeah, to be fair, it isn't in Canberra, but it's within an hour, like a bunch of other awesome spots. Yeah, so we went out and stayed at this caravan park, and it was right on the water. We had a bunch of friends out there, and we're still in that period where we're experimenting with partying. Got a big bonfire going. Had a lot of people out there between the age of about 16 and 25. And yeah, getting up to a bit of mischief as per usual at some of these parties when you're younger. Nothing too crazy. And we had a few people come into the party that weren't actually invited. A couple of people in particular that used to go to our high school that we weren't mates with, but they rocked up because they were locals and we kind of let it slide. And after a little while, these people started throwing fireworks around and they were rubbing some of the girls up the wrong way and just being absolute pests. And we gave them a couple of friendly warnings. And yeah, the final straw occurred where they started throwing fireworks at the girls and they were blowing up in their face. And just thinking about it now, it's funny how this is what really made me angry. But 5+ years earlier, I was throwing fireworks at people and doing a similar sort of thing. So yeah, another hypocritical moment. But seeing some of these girls that were getting harassed by the guys, yeah, a few of us took it upon ourselves to get the boys and get them out of the party. And they didn't want to leave. So it started getting a little bit physical. These guys had had multiple warnings and it was time for them to piss off and they didn't want a bar of it. So I remember grabbing onto this guy who had actually been in a fight with one of my best mates in high school. And he was a really dirty fighter, just an absolute pest. And grabbed onto him and started, telling him to get a move on. And he didn't want a bar of it. So I remember grabbing him and taking him over to a waist-high fence. And then there was probably like a 3-meter drop-off into the water. And I had a lot of history with this guy. Didn't like him. Shouldn't have let him come to begin with. But one thing led to another. And they came. And yeah, it was time for him to leave. So I grabbed him and took him over to the fence. And I remember trying to pick him up and dangle him over this fence just to scare the living shit out of him and say, like, you're throwing fireworks at the girls, like. And I remember like getting him and having him half over, and I was tempted to just drop him into the water. I knew it was deep. There was a way he could get out and it would just wake him up from this little world that he was trapped in. And of course I had a bit of liquid courage, had a few beers in the system, so I wasn't thinking straight. And as I'm sort of picking him up to chuck him over the fence, a couple of his mates come and grab him, and then a couple of my mates, and it's like a bit of a tug of war to throw this dude over the fence. And we end up bringing him back over, scared the shit out of him, and then they left, and we're like, okay, sweet, it's resolved. They learnt their lesson. That's the end of it. A couple of hours pass, a few more beers go down, and we're all having a great time by the fire, just having a good time with all our close friends, maybe only 30 or 40 people. And then we hear a bit of a whisper that he'd come back with a car full of mates. And without even thinking, as soon as I heard that, just started legging it. And there was like maybe half a dozen of us that just started sprinting straight up to where they were, because we heard they were coming down to, you know, smash cars with like trolley poles, and they were just going to go to town on some of our setup. So leg it up towards them, and I got a little bit of a head start, so I was probably 50 meters ahead of the rest of them. And I see the car pull up. I'm running up to the car to just, I don't know, like probably start having a bit of a crack. And from the side, someone comes out of nowhere and just goes boom, smacks me in the side of the head with a trolley pole. So you know when you're pushing those Woolworths trolleys, they have this bar there that you can take off, and some people use them as weapons apparently. And so yeah, I got clocked in the side of the head, got knocked to the ground, and was sort of just getting my bearings. And a couple of my mates rock up at this stage, and the guys get straight back in the car. And I think my mate got one of the dudes and, you know, got a few hits in, and then they reverse off, and that was the end of it. And I was just like, not concussed, but pretty rocked. Like had a big lump and a bit of a cut on my head, and, you know, went back down to the fire. And that was kind of more or less the end of it for me in that night. We ended up finding out where he lived and went around to his house the next day to sort it out and try to organise just a one-on-one fight. It's really weird that I'm talking so much about fighting, because it wasn't a big part of my upbringing, but that particular time, sort of 16 through to 20, yeah, where the ego is very palpable, and I guess that age you feel like you might have something to prove. And if someone's smacking you in the head with a trolley pole, the last thing I wanted to do was leave it there. So we found out where he lived, went around to his house, knocked on the door, and his dad answered the door. And you could see him peering through the side window, scared as hell. And the dad came out, and my mate was there with me. And the dad picked up a brick, and my mate and the dad had each other by the collar. My mate's like threatening to punch him. The dad's holding a brick to his head, and it looks like it's just about to be absolute carnage. And that kind of just like was a screaming fest for 30 seconds. And then I think he put the brick down and picked up like a tile or something like that was even sharper. And then we just like, let go of him, let's get out of here. And yeah, again, it didn't get resolved then and there. It was something that dragged on for a little bit longer. So that was the first weekend, and that's not even the main story I'm telling. Yeah, so nothing ended up actually happening that day at his house, other than my mate and I nearly getting bricked by this fella's dad. We got called into the police station that week, and essentially they just scared the shit out of us. They heard our side of the story too, and I think they knew that old mate was talking shit. Yeah, so big weekend, quite an interesting one. Didn't end up seeing that guy again for years, but I caught up with him down the track, and yeah, I feel a bit better about the whole situation now. The week went on. The test party was a bit of a hit, besides what happened to me, of course. Yeah, so that wasn't even the main story that I was trying to tell, but I figured it was worthwhile setting the stage, because we were back at that same location where I got hit with the trolley pole a week later, and this time it was my mate's 18th birthday, which we were all really excited about. I'd had a massive week at school, exams and a few other things going on behind the scenes with the previous story, so that was all still factoring into the situation. And we got out there, and this was a party I'd been looking forward to for ages, but I was half tempted to not even drink just because I was so over it. I was run down. Still had a bit of a headache and swelling and stuff from getting hit with the trolley pole the week before. But having a pretty rubber arm back then, I ended up getting on the beers and overdoing it a little bit, to be frank. I remember hitting the hay at about 12 o'clock, and a girl that I was pretty close with at the time, she came in to the swag, and I'm pretty sure I just clean passed out before anything happened. Probably the best time in history to pass out prematurely. It meant that she got out and went back to the party, and I'm just, zonked out, laying in the swag. And where I positioned the swag was actually in the camping zone, But because there was quite a few people there were a lot of cars parked down in this camping area. So the secondhand information that I was told tells me, so like the previous weekend, we had a few people roll in that were uninvited. These guys didn't bring fireworks, but they brought that sleazy attitude that a lot of these other guys brought the week before. And they started harassing some of the girls. Apparently they were being really rude and things popped off again. So I can't remember exactly what happened, but I recall some of the guys doing a bit of damage to someone's car and a girl trying to lock herself away and hide in the car while some of these blokes are like scaring her, and it just sounded like an absolute shit show. One of my mates found out about it. Big, strong footy player, the last person you want to stuff with, but the nicest guy you'll ever meet. He's chasing after this guy that's been harassing the girl, and apparently they were on the bitumen, like the tarmac road, and he's running, and without even thinking of his own safety, just does a big Superman dive for this guy, reaches out, just grabs onto his shirt and hauls him down to the ground, and he just gets grazed up all over his body. And I'm pretty sure he was just like laying into him. And a few other mates saw what was happening and they just immediately tried to grab him off because they knew that if he kept going, things could have got pretty bad. And so these guys did a bit of damage on their way out, jumped in their car and just legged it. And another friend of mine, I wasn't super good mates with him at the time, but we had a lot of really close mutual friends, so we're definitely in the same sort of circle of people. He's found out what's happened. He's ran over to his car, jumped in his 5-seater ute, very good driver, just knocked it into reverse. Apparently he did a bit of a burnout and he's happened to just reverse straight over the top of where I was sleeping in my swag, and I'm out of it. I'm like on another planet, and all I remember is just waking up from what seemed like the worst dream ever, and I was just screaming like, what the fuck just happened? I remember being there just like cooped up in this swag, not knowing what's happening, just blood just fucking dripping down my face, and it was like really thick blood. It was hard to breathe. And before you knew it, my best mate Harry, he was there. I'm leaning back into him like this, and he's sitting on his bum, just scooping all the thick blood out of my mouth so I could breathe properly. And then all the party comes over and sees what's happening and thinks like, oh my God, like this is bad. Benny's been run over. And because one of the guys that did it, he was drunk at the time, they then stood around and decided whether or not to call the ambulance, because they knew if they called the ambulance, the police is going to come, and then one of our mates is potentially going to go to jail for running over me. I don't know exactly how long they all deliberated on this for. Pretty sure it was a little bit longer than what I would have liked, but I kind of understand. About 40 minutes or so after, that's when the ambulance rocked up. So I think they twiddled their thumbs for a little bit, and imagine that, a bunch of 16 to 25-year-olds, one of the boys in the group has just run over another one of the boys in the group, and they're deciding, okay, hospital for one or jail for the other. Like, really sticky situation to be in. And someone that I wasn't actually super close with at the time, he was the one that just said, fuck you guys, I'm calling the ambulance. So thank you, Benny Kelly. I'll never forget that, even though I don't really remember what the fuck happened. So yeah, the ambulance rocked up, and how's this? The police rock up, and they knew that this guy had run me over. They didn't even breath test him. And that's fine by me. I was actually stoked when I found out that bit of information. The last thing I wanted is a friend to go to jail because he'd made a mistake and run over me. I remember just coming in and out of consciousness for the next 30 or 45 minutes that I was waiting for the ambulance, and more people gathered. And I remember people looking around on the ground and saying, oh, like, where's his teeth? It looked like I was missing 2 or 3 teeth down in here. And I remember people doing an Easter egg hunt for my teeth, and they're debating whether to call the ambulance, and then I would pass out, and then I would wake back up, and the whole time my mate's like scooping the blood out of my mouth and trying to keep me like, you know, clear airways and all that sort of stuff. Ambulance rocks up, jump in the ambulance, and then I just remember boosting it down the Barton Highway, going between 140 and 180. And yeah, again, going in and out of consciousness. It wasn't like I was going to die at any point, but it was pretty bad. Woke up at the hospital the next morning in all sorts, not knowing what the hell's going on, and having some of my family and my friends there. And then, 12 to 18 hours later, I was in for surgery. Yeah, so that night, when everyone was looking around on the ground for my teeth, my jaw had been hit by the axle, the undercarriage of the car. I must have been laying on my back, so the tires didn't run over me. It was the undercarriage of the car that just smacked me clean in the jaw, in the chin, just like an uppercut from bloody Francis. And it looked like I was missing 2 to 3 teeth here, but it wasn't until a couple of days later, when they did the first scan, that they realized I wasn't missing any teeth. My jaw had severed, so there was a gap that was probably close to, I don't know, maybe like 15 to 25 mil between these bottom center teeth. And that's how much my jaw was broken. So I had snapped bones up in here and down in here, and I got plates, and it all got secured and whatnot. And then before you knew it, surgery was done and dusted. I had a dozen of my friends in the room with me, and the laughs were happening again. And obviously I was still in a lot of pain, but having my friends and my family there for the next few days just to support me through that, like, that made that whole dark period of the journey enjoyable at times. And so yeah, on the second or third day of being in hospital, Dad was outside the waiting room, and he said he saw this young fella walking down the hallway, and before he even got to the room, before even talking to him, he knew that that's who it was that had run me over. The way he'd slumped his shoulders, the way he was carrying himself, he just knew that this guy felt the guilt and the weight of the world. What a legend though. Despite him getting put on suicide watch because he felt so guilty, he still rocked up a couple of days later, did the walk of shame, and came in and apologized and showed his face. And so, I feel like I'm a fairly reasonable kind of person with those sorts of things. Like, I imagine if some people had been in my shoes and they'd been run over by someone that was drinking, that'd be the end of it. The fact that he turned up, took ownership and apologized, for me, that was enough. Yeah, so I ended up getting these braces wired onto my teeth, and essentially the point of those braces were keeping my jaw shut at all times. And so over the course of the next few months, these braces that were wired in, they had a different set of rubber bands that would hold my jaw shut. So for the first couple of weeks, I was pretty much just like talking like this, and I couldn't open my teeth up at all. I could just get a straw in to suck my food and liquids. And it meant that when I went back to school a week or so later, people had heard what was happening. And then I get to school and I'm still like swollen, and I've got these braces in, and people are trying to talk to me and ask what happened. And I'm just like, oh, it's kind of hard to explain. And my jaw's like, I can't, and I couldn't talk, and it was so frustrating. But I was back at school pretty quick, and that following week after it happened, how's this? Another party popped up, and again, it was another one of my best mates. Could barely talk, and a girl that I was semi into at the time, she was going to this party, so I thought, oh, well, I should show my face, and got there, and we kind of had eyes for one another for the first hour or so, didn't chat a whole lot. Then eventually she came over, and I'm like trying to hold a conversation, and then before you know it, we're kissing, and my jaw is completely shut, and I'm trying to kiss someone. Like, it was the most awkward kiss you've ever seen. Like, oh, I don't know why I even tried to kiss her. Like, can you imagine that? Like, clench your teeth shut and imagine trying to kiss someone like that, like a proper kiss. Didn't work, but we gave it a crack. And that party ended up being really fun. I didn't drink or anything, but it was just nice to be around my friends again. For the next couple of months, I slowly released the rubber bands and introduced foods again. And then before you knew it, I was signed up to go over to New Zealand for the Pan Pacific Water Polo Nationals that I'd been semi-training for. I was kind of a late ring into the squad. I swear I just got the call up for morale and just to get some extra numbers, because all of these people had been training non-stop. They were super fit. They were going and doing swim school 3-4 times a week, not to mention the 3-4 trainings at night per week. And I would kind of mosey in wherever I wanted. And ended up going over to New Zealand a few months after this accident. I had no idea how good my jaw was at that stage. I had the wire bands and stuff all taken out of my mouth so I could eat again and whatnot. But before you knew it, I'm playing in my first water polo comp in a little while and versing Kiwi blokes that are 120, 130 kilos, and I weigh probably 65 kilos at the time, and I'm marking up, and you got these big boys that are throwing elbows and kicking you in the balls and just being so rough. And that whole tournament, I was thinking all it's going to take is one of these guys to just flick me in the jaw and it's just going to break again. Luckily, I sort of flew under the radar and didn't have to test out the structural integrity of my new plates and bolts. Yeah, it was pretty controversial, the fact that I even wanted to go and play in this comp a few months after my injury. Doctors thought I was an idiot. My parents thought I was a bit of an idiot. But, you know, we'd paid for the tickets. I reassured them that I was in a good enough state to play, and I just wanted to go to New Zealand, let's be real. And so, yeah, didn't cop any massive hits to the jaw and had an awesome time. What is there to take from that story? So, yeah, bit of a wild one. I think in the grand scheme of things, getting run over by a car could be a whole lot worse. It was pretty bad, but let's be frank, to get run over by a car and then a few months later being able to be back playing water polo and back eating normally, I was very lucky. Could have been a lot worse. Yeah, I guess so. One of the key things that I took from that whole experience was how important it is to be selective about where you set up your camp for the night. I picked somewhere very last minute. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking straight, and I paid the price. So now, if I do happen to have a drink or 2 or 12 whilst camping, I'll pick a site before I even pick up a beer. Somewhere that's not only away from vehicles, away from potential floods, away from potential trees, but also somewhere just peeled off and away from humans. It's somewhere quiet, somewhere flat. The more you camp, the better you're going to get at picking a campsite. Yeah, and so why do I tell this story? One, I feel like it's a pretty unique thing to happen to someone and to get off relatively unscathed. Just a few broken bones in the jaw, bit of a broken ego, and it's important to let people know that the way in which you pick a campsite can actually keep you alive. Yeah, I guess some of these stories that have happened to me, you just never think you're going to be the one it happens to. I'd heard of people getting run over, you see it in movies, and you just think, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to be that person that sets my tent up near a tree and a tree branch falls. I'm not going to be that person that gets hit with a trolley pole. You just never know. And if you're continually putting yourself in the firing line, Murphy's Law, if it can happen, it will happen. And I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm just talking out aloud and hopefully making people think a little bit more before making big decisions when you're blind drunk. But yeah, I guess the only thing I've left out with that story is how I went about going through the whole insurance claiming process. And obviously that took quite a toll on my jaw. It meant that some of these bottom teeth got fused to the bone, so they'll inevitably die at a later point in my life. So we went through an insurance claim, and because it was in New South Wales opposed to in Canberra, got a whole lot less money than probably what we're entitled to. I won't bother go giving numbers. If you're a friend and you see me around and you want to know, I'm happy to talk about it. But essentially, I had a lot of family members and friends telling me at the age of my early 20s, you should get a house mortgage with that money. You should set yourself up. You should do this. You should invest it. And maybe I should have. But I guess you'll find out in some of the next episodes what I ended up doing with that money. Stay tuned.